Cape Town could soon be home to two new massive data centers that will require huge amounts of water and electricity. The center that is earmarked to be built close to Cape Town International Airport, it's a total of 120,000 square meters. And the first step to making this a reality has already been approved by the Municipal Planning Tribunal. There has been some opposition to the center's approval. Opponents citing massive electricity needs and the water required for cooling. And around the world, there are similar concerns. But in the state of New York in the USA, that state already embarking on a moratorium on new data centers being built. New York becoming the first US state to stop construction of these data centers. Dr. Pitso Tsibolane is with the University of Cape Town Center for Information Technology and National Development in Africa. He does some research on the impacts on digital infrastructure. Good morning, Pitso. Really appreciate your time. Maybe let's start here with explaining to those who may not be well informed on data centers, what does a data center actually do?
Thank you, Lester. So a data center, I think the best way for people to think about it is just as a warehouse, a large warehouse full of computers where these computers are really concerned on processing things, daily things that we do that we don't even think about, such as your emails, banking, WhatsApp, AI chatbots that we use. Those don't really live on your phone. They live in those warehouses. And these warehouses, we call them the cloud. And when we're talking about data centers, we're talking of this massive infrastructure that gets laid out, and its job is really to do all of this massive processing.
Yeah.
Now, what we are talking about in this case, we are talking of hyperscalers, or these are types of data centers which are even more massive, but they're really geared towards facilitating the processing of this AI, this massive AI wave that we currently have.
Maybe to isolate it to people's experience, if you have a home PC, you would know that your home PC requires energy. If your home PC has been on for some time, you would sometimes hear the fan of your home PC starting to whir there, and that is to cool down that PC. And if you are in an office, you may have maybe a server room, which will be a bigger example of your home PC. And a data center would be an even bigger example of maybe your company server room. And these require electricity. And like that little fan on your home PC, these data centers need to be cooled down. And they use vast amounts of water to cool themselves down. Have I successfully tried to replicate for us to understand what a data center is?
Indeed. And not only do they consume a massive amount of water to cool down, as you have just correctly pointed out, Lester. What obviously goes with it is high usage of electricity to power them. And this obviously, as we can logically think, it comes with a lot of carbon emissions. There's obviously the water being consumed. And just to add to your point on the water, what is so interesting about hyperscalers, or what is notable, is people sometimes tend to think that the water is reusable. But here, because we are cooling down a massive amount of IT infrastructure, the water actually evaporates. So unlike many other industries where water, gets put in and sometimes be returned back, maybe sometimes a little dirty, and to be recycled, here the water actually disappears. And this is the thing that people need to understand, that while we can build more electricity generation capacity, we cannot make or create or manufacture rainfall. When this water gets evaporated, it disappears, and this is really where the problem is, on top of the issue of the land and infrastructure that also becomes a contested debate in a place which is, as you've correctly pointed out, a water-scarce area where we just recently faced the prospects of day zero, where we almost did not have any water. Yeah. And when we bring this massive infrastructure, which requires so much water, we have to really think hard, because we are not a very water-rich area. We are actually very water-poor.
Definitely the concerns on the impact on resources top of mind, but I'm not a complete Luddite. The digital infrastructure underpins many of the things that I do, that I used to work, that makes life easy. It's the cloud computing, as you mentioned. It's my online banking. It's the streaming that I use to watch my shows. It's the e-commerce. It's the government digital services. The concern on resources aside, we'll get to that now. But in terms of the pros, the benefits to economic investment, digital infrastructure, data sovereignty. These are all things that we also have to keep in mind when having these. There's definitely balances and trade-offs of what makes our lives easier, what gets the economy going, but also keeping in mind what concerns and constraints there are on our resources.
Absolutely, and what I really like about this discussion as well is, people need to understand that even those people that oppose the infrastructure of data centers, it's not made easily, because as you've just correctly pointed out, Lester, there are economic benefits to technology, to new technologies and technology investment. And definitely, I, myself, as a researcher within the field of ICT4D, I'm concerned about how technology is used for development. And I believe that South Africa should be within the AI economy, and South Africa should play part within the digital economy, the global digital economy. But we need to be thinking about how we enter into this as a participant with agency, who sets terms by demanding transparency and knowing exactly what we are getting ourselves into, and letting the communities around to also have the agency to say what their fears are. And these fears must be gauged, and so that this development happens together, and we grow the economy in a way that does not hurt, that does not exclude, that does not only favor the one side, but empowers the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, for the South African debate on this, there are general dilemmas and maybe specific South Africa, country-specific dilemmas. South Africa, we already have quite an established fiber network. We are growing our renewable energy capacity. South Africa is at a very strategic location in connecting Africa to international countries because of where undersea internet cables are also located in South Africa. But when we talk about some of the dilemmas, we look at Eskom's grid remains under pressure. We are a water scarce country, and that's an ongoing concern. Many argue that electricity and our capacity should first support maybe our manufacturing and economic sectors that create jobs than focusing on the development of data centers for the possible investment of ICT infrastructure and investment.
Absolutely. And quite importantly, Lester, is for people to understand that the business of data center is also sort of a new model of business. And if people should not have the same assumptions that we currently have, the industries that you have just mentioned, we understand them quite well. We know where the usage is, we know where capacity lies, and how we can support it with what we have, the scarce resources that we already have. However, the business of data centers is capital intensive. It's not labor intensive as well. And people need to remember this. What I mean by this is that when a data center is built, once it runs, it does not require much labor. So some of the benefits are usually overstated, while indeed there's a lot of capital investment that goes into building this, the partnerships that are struck by the infrastructure companies themselves with overseas companies. While these are huge, they bring money, but it's almost like a one-sided relationship where the community walks away with the negative benefits, but perhaps the owners of the technology walk away with a large chunk of the benefit. So we need to be thinking about what type of an investment this is and how do we make sure that we manage it in a way that benefits everyone, that does not cause harm to the environment, that does not cause harm to the local economies.
So when data centers are being approved here in Cape Town, but in the state of New York, you have a state government saying, wait, we want a moratorium for at least a year on the building of new data centers because we need to learn more about the impact, the environmental impact, the impact on our resources before we approve anymore. What does New York know that South Africa or Cape Town needs to learn first?
Absolutely. What has been happening within the U.S., and those that follow international news will be aware that over the last a few months and perhaps just over a year, there's been this massive drive by the current government in the U.S. to invest massively and to give all of these concessions to the big tech companies to build and to get licenses in different states to build massive data center infrastructure to support the AI growth and the AI agenda of the American government. What they know now is the effects, the negative effects to the communities that these large data centers have wrought. They've in some cases wreaked havoc within communities where they end up consuming much more electricity than it was envisaged. They create a lot of disruption to even the local life, on the roads, on the water resources, and on the electricity availability. What they now know is how when these businesses begin to operate, that they are almost like a juggernaut that cannot be stopped. And what has happened is people are left waterless, people are left landless, people are left with infrastructure that causes so much disruption in terms of noise, in terms of the electricity usage. What they now know is what they want to avoid. And what the mayor of New York, Kathy Hochul, has said just a few days ago was to say we need to have a stake in this discussion. We need to know exactly how much of the impact is going to be. It needs to be clear, more than beyond the hype. We need to know exactly what's going to happen, and we need to legislate and control how these resources are going to be used. That's what they know. And we can learn a lot from that as South Africa, to say there are people that have already gone ahead and did this hyperscaler investment. But what they have seen is not so rosy, and we need to think about it. And this is not to say they're all bad, Lester, as we said, and I don't want people to think that we don't want this, but we are saying let us have a discussion that involves transparency, consent, and equality in it.
Dr. Pitso Tsibolane is with the Center for Information Technology and National Development in Africa, based at the University of Cape Town.